Hello and a very warm welcome to today's program called All About the Brahma Kumaris. We are here today to interview Sister Denise, who is been following the principles and practices of Raja Yoga meditation with the Brahma Kumaris, and she has been doing so for the past 40 years. Sister Denise has been the first student of the institution in the West, like I said, for the past 40 years. We are here today to ask previously unasked questions about the Brahma Kumaris, what it's all about, what are its beliefs and practices, and to get to know the behind-the-scenes workings of this interesting institution. The Brahma Kumaris has been in existence for the past 77 years in India, and it has currently about 120 countries that has members practicing the principles within the institution. Thank you, Sister Denise, and welcome to today's program.
Thank you.
Today's topic is somewhat a controversial one, and it involves science and spirituality.
Yes.
There are many Brahma concepts within the Brahma Kumaris which will cause somebody with a basic understanding of science or even a PhD in quantum physics to think that we who practice within the institution Raja Yoga meditation will consider us to be completely nuts because of the beliefs, because it's so at odds with what science is considered to be commonplace.
Yes.
What would your reaction be to that?
Well, first of all, I think that it's really not an institution.
Okay.
It is a body of knowledge that comes from a divine source. Science is human observation of matter and the laws of matter, whereas spirituality doesn't come from observation and drawing conclusions from those observations. So it's arrived in a very different way. We use the word recognition, and it's a very subjective thing. Science is objective. So we're really approaching reality from very, very different angles, which I don't feel are necessarily incompatible. I have a good friend in California who is a biophysicist, Beverly Rubik, who is particularly interested in bringing together science and spirituality. So her view as a physicist is that they're really not incompatible, whereas the conventional scientific establishment does not hold that view. Science is reductionist. It is based on an assumption that everything that can be measured exists, and if it can't be measured, it doesn't exist. And now, you know, the idea of the observer effect is having to be dealt with, that the observer actually alters the experiment. And so what is that? The science hasn't been able to really deal with that in a satisfactory way. So science is beginning to have to come to terms with the fact that it isn't quite as clear-cut as it thought. And spirituality historically, you know, maybe back from the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, when science was seriously challenging some of the beliefs in the conventional religions, and science looked much better. And now it's kind of changing again, where science isn't quite so sure of its position. And I would make a difference between spirituality and religion. What we do in Brahma Kumaris, we do not call it religion, but we do call it spirituality. And spirituality, we would say, is to identify oneself as a spiritual being who functions in a material world through a material body, using the sense organs to interface with the material world, and even a person interfacing with another person, a soul to soul, via the human body. But there are so many aspects of human communication that are subtle. So we start talking about atmosphere, vibration, feeling, motivation, intuition, things that, you know, can't so easily get categorized in a more scientific, physical way. So I think that the period of time that we're going through is also a shift in ideas that are happening. So I'm very interested in trying to find contact points between people who are having a scientific background, people who are having a spiritual background, and coming together in meaningful conversation to try to identify areas where science and spirituality are complementary, as opposed to the traditional opposition of the two. And I think that that's really the way forward.
Does being a Brahma Kumari mean that you have to believe something without seeing it? Because that is how science thinks, doesn't it? I see this. This is a pin because I see it as a pin, so it is a pin. I can prove it's a pin. Now, how do you explain to your scientific mind, well, God exists, although I can't see him?
Well, we look at it in a different way. Anything that's physical that you can see and touch, science has also said that, well, it's just energy, and it's not as solid as it seems to be. Einstein had said that our sense perceptions, our sense of touch, seeing, hearing, tasting, and all of this, is effective only in the everyday world. Once we start to look at matter beyond the everyday world, our sense perceptions are no longer useful. We cannot see X-rays, gamma rays, you know, we cannot make contact through our sense organs with things that are outside the realm of everyday reality. So they have started to really, you know, go to dimensions where these things are really coming under question. So, you know, being a Brahma Kumari there isn't anything like being a Brahma Kumari. You say, okay, I consider myself to be a spiritual person, and I relate to and subscribe to the things that other people in the Brahma Kumaris community subscribe to and study. So then in that sense you could say, I am a Brahma Kumari, but actually it'd be better to say, I'm a spiritual being, you know. And then coming into community, coming into relationship with people who are like-minded in certain ways, we would use that identity. But, you know, you're a thinking being, and you think what you decide to think. Nobody can force you to think a particular way. It's not a question of indoctrination or anything like that. The body of knowledge is presented to people who show interest, and this was what also happened to me. I was very interested in learning how to meditate, in, you know, there are a lot of people, they say, we're looking for truth, you know, and I was one of those, looking for truth. What is truth? I don't know. What are you looking for? I have no idea, but if I find it, I'll know, yeah? So there is that kind of idea of recognition. And I think that people who do decide that they're going to study this knowledge and apply the principles and live the lifestyle and all of that, they decide that because it makes sense to them. It may not make sense to many people, but it makes sense to someone, they'll do it. It's like shopping. You go shopping for a washing machine, you say, okay, this one fulfills my criteria, I buy that one. In the same way, there's all sorts of philosophies out there in the world. And I think a person who's a seeker will study, will shop around and so on, and who ends up with Brahma Kumaris does so because it fits, it seems right, relate to the other people, and you start doing it, and pretty soon you say, yep, this is good for me. And you also see that among the community of Brahma Kumaris, which is why I prefer to call it a community than an institution, there's a wide variation of how people interpret the information, how they choose to apply the different lifestyle ways, and I find that very interesting, that there is that huge variety, and that we are able to study together, coexist together, serve together, even where there is quite a broad spectrum of interpretation. And this is why I sometimes find myself calling it an embryonic civilization. Yeah,
That's very
the civilization.
It's a very beautiful term.
I like. It's not born, but it's getting born. It's happening. You know, you start to see another person as a soul. You start to really live your life as if you are indeed sharing your life with the divine supreme being, and you decide that, yeah, you will take guidance from that source, and you will move forward paying attention to your karma, developing your character, serving where you can, enriching yourself spiritually, and moving along this path of life headed towards this idea of a renewed world, a new civilization based on spiritual values, spiritual principles, spiritual virtues, as opposed to the current civilization, which we call a Western civilization, very much based on materialism, which I think has failed humanity. And this is why so many people are saying, well, it has failed us, what do we do now? And so I think turning to a spiritual source is a logical consequence of that.
How would you explain to somebody who sits in front of you that according to the Brahma Kumaris, time is 5,000 years?
It's a cycle. There are many cycles. Recently I was in Mexico, where you have many of these images of the Mexican time cycle, which is also 5,000. The Hindu time cycle is 5,000.
When you speak about Mexican time cycle, is it different from the Mayan calendar?
The Mayan calendar is 5,000.
Yes.
Astrologically, Western astrology, you have a 28,000 year cycle, which is this process of the stars making one full circle. So there are many, many time cycles. You have the cycles of the moon, you have the annual cycle of the seasons, many cycles. And so we look at time in this 5,000 year repeating cycle, within which there are these ages, the golden age, the silver age, the copper age, the iron age. And I think that, you know, it gives us a way to conceptualize our eternity, our immortality, because it's very difficult for a person to think, I am an eternal soul. How do you think about eternity? It's very long. We in Western civilization tend to think in linear terms. They say the scientific community has placed us smack in the middle of a 28 billion year long line. They say 14 billion years ago there was a Big Bang, and after another 14 billion years there'll be another Big Bang, and poof, that's it, goodbye. But we're right in the middle of that, so we're okay. We will carry on. But if we carry on the way we are, I don't think we can carry on this way for another 14 billion years. There are many things that are coming up in archaeology and paleontology and so on, which tend to correspond better with some of the myths that you find in the pre-present era communities and civilizations, creation myths, destruction myths, energies from outer space, whatever. There's a lot of these myths and legends that talk about huge changes that happen in the world from time to time, and the geologists show this also in the different ice ages. The one very recent thing is, on the day when all the dinosaurs died, most of the bees also died.
Okay. Most people don't know that.
Well, it's on the news at this time. And if you follow some of these discoveries, you find that there's a story that it says that from time to time, things get reset drastically, just like you can reset your mobile phone if you want to and just go back to the beginning. In a way, I think this idea of the cycle is that when things reach a point where you can say the entropy reaches a maximum point, you press a button and start again.
Okay.
And so we can do that.
Dr. Emoto's experiments on the observer affecting the observed.
His experiments were strictly about water. And the effect of thought, words, prayer on water. Positive words, negative words in different languages even. Very interesting how the water responded.
Why has this made people in the field of quantum physics uncomfortable?
Need to ask them. Because I really am not adequately informed or skilled in the field of physics to really be able to speak on their behalf.
Okay. According to the Brahma Kumaris, was the earth actually created? And if so, by whom?
Our understanding is that matter is eternal. And the earth is also eternal. But it goes through changes. And every so often it will replenish itself, reset itself. And I think that the spiritual practice that we do is a very important part of that reset and that replenishing. The idea is that matter loses its own integrity and reaches a state of depletion, just as the soul also reaches a state of depletion. And our idea of God is that this being we call the Supreme Soul is completely changeless or immutable. The soul is sometimes filled with spiritual power, and when this energy comes into motion through life on earth, this energy gets dissipated and depleted. In the same way, the earth itself, there is a point in time every so often where it becomes completely in a pure state. We use the term sato pradhan, absolutely pure. And then when it becomes old and depleted, then it becomes what we call tamo pradhan. And so to go from tamo pradhan, depleted, worn out, emptied, to sato pradhan is the result of this energy from God being pulled by souls. So the soul gets recharged and even matter gets recharged, and then on a physical level that becomes manifest. So we think that just the act of meditating and drawing this energy into ourselves and letting it, it's going to affect our bodies, it's going to affect the environment. So we just keep doing it in the thought that eventually it'll reach a point where a real transformation on a physical level can happen. Yes. So we think that the earth is forever, but that every so often it gets renewed. And we think that that is a creative process. God is always called the creator, so that at the time when the earth is totally depleted, maybe then the creator will make this energy available, and we connect with it mentally and just draw it, become a kind of conduit for it. This is the idea.
Does the Brahma Kumaris have an active relationship with the scientific community? And if so, how?
I think that there are quite a lot of people who are part of the Brahma Kumaris community with a very considerable scientific background. And these people have the knowledge and the expertise to communicate to the scientific community because they have expertise in both areas. And so they will do that. But I think it's very much not the Brahma Kumaris community and the scientific community, but it's individuals who do this. And within the scientific community, there's a big variety of people. And of course, we think that anyway, whatever you are, you're still a soul. And you can have a soul who is fundamentally, spiritually hungry and interested, who has a background in science. And if they encounter Brahma Kumaris, they may well, find themselves, filling in the gaps and putting the dots together and saying, yes, I can express the relationship between science and spirituality, and that will be very interesting when people start to do that. And in the Brahma Kumaris literature, there are predictions, and some of the predictions say that a time will come when the scientific community it becomes that section of humanity that says, what the Brahma Kumaris are saying about the soul is right. That time hasn't come at this stage, but it is one of the predictions. So, within the body of knowledge, there are statements like that, many types of predictions.
If you have a person, use the example of Stephen Hawking earlier, but somebody who is of a scientific background, who is genuinely interested in learning spirituality, but obviously he's coming from a scientific perspective. That's his way of approaching life. And you will say to him something that you're not your physical body, you're a soul.
Well, it depends. You don't know, because one thing I've learned is I really can't deal in hypothetical examples because they're never true.
Okay.
And I can't do generalizations because they're never true either. So the only thing I can do is somebody comes with whatever background they have and we have a conversation and we see how it goes. Because as I said before, it's not about me trying to impose an idea on somebody. That doesn't make sense. I remember having this conversation with my father when he was aware that he was going to die and leave his body, and I asked him, how he was preparing for his death and what he thought would happen next and all of these things. And his thinking really didn't include very much on a spiritual level. So, okay, there are people who just don't go into that. And he was one of them. My mother, on the other hand, interestingly, she was in a very severe car crash where she went into coma for a couple of weeks. And when she came out of the coma, she said to me, "Oh, you know, I know where I know what you do in meditation. I know where you go. I was there." You know, and then we had some very interesting conversations on the basis of what she had experienced during that period of time in coma, when of course the soul is very detached from the body. So, you know, these were just two individuals who happened to be my parents, very different people, very different approach to spirituality, in the same family. And you get that, you know, in most families, a big variety of where people are in terms of their inner dimension.
Okay. Thank you. So this brings us to the end of today's segment. Thank you, Sister Denise. There you have it, listeners. As far as science and spirituality is concerned, we will take each person on a case-by-case basis. And as Sister Denise explained, we're not here to convert or convince anyone. Brahma Kumaris just shares what it has to share, and it's up to the individual to accept what they wish to or not. We thank you for joining us today, and we will see you soon. Thank you and goodbye.